BodyWisePerfectSize.com is pleased to bring you Hilary from Be Nourished. Welcome, Hilary. Body shame seems to be so prevalent in our culture, and I know you've done a lot of work in that area.
We ask our clients, when did you first learn something was wrong with your body? And inevitably, it's 8. The majority of women choose 8. Sometimes a little younger, sometimes a little older, but I would say that's the average. When you look at like the book Reviving Ophelia, it's a book that came out I think in the 90s, and it talks about adolescent girls, and that's when we see the self start to disappear also in girls, and and it's, I think, so highly correlated with how the demands of the culture shift on us so quickly. So the culture is very clear to say that bodies are a problem. So if bodies get too big, or, mainly too big, right? That it's something that we have to take responsibility for. And we also, in our, particularly in the United States, we don't really trust our culture, our people with food. Our response into this concern about disease that have been commonly associated with obesity, but aren't necessarily so, like diabetes and hypertension, has been to overly nutritionalize. I think we're taught very young to be very private, and maybe even to some extent disgusted by the ways our bodies change. That there's a high degree of reaction in our culture to the way young women's bodies change and turn into women's bodies. And we don't have rituals to celebrate what it is to come into that there's power in that, and beauty, if that's a value of someone's, and that it means that you will be seen by the culture in a particular way that could also be seen as valuable. And instead, we teach girls to hide and whisper about starting their periods. We get concerned when they start to grow breasts, when women start to get rounder, as many do right before their periods begin. We have a reaction like they could be gaining too much weight, and that's happening so much more now with this focus on childhood obesity. I feel like we've so lost touch with the power of women's bodies. Like, we aren't even allowed to talk about it without it being kind of woo-woo, which just pains me. Girls' bodies are seen as very dangerous things instead of things to be celebrated and normalized on a regular basis. It's met with sexual objectification. And then we respond right around the same time with dieting. Not that they're directly related, but it's interesting to see that even though sexual objectification is certainly unwanted, it grants girls this power, in a way, that they may not be ready for. And then we respond by teaching them how to diet in silence. It's really distracting. It's similar to the concept of a year after the women got the right to vote, we started our first beauty pageants. To me, they seem like similar energies. So, we're really scared of the power of women. We're taught to be very worried about them and very responsible for them, and responsible for the ways others react to them, whether that's the sexual objectification we experience, or just if someone thinks we're too fat. That's somehow all of our responsibility. When girls grow up seeing people dieting, and when we see countless ads on the TV that there's something that we could be doing better, and when they make clothes that only fit certain body types, even at a young age, that it really sets us up to not be able to know that our body has our back, that our body's doing everything it knows to do, and that usually it works just fine as long as there's not a lot of static introduced into our relationship, for instance, with food.
It seems so sad that shame seems to follow us into adulthood.
I think shame in the body arena for a lot of women is centered around this idea of possible rejection. That possible rejection can occur at any moment, and that there's something that we can do to control that. And, when we look at Brené Brown's definition of shame that came from her really wonderful research, we know that it's a painful feeling that comes from a perception of being flawed. And we live in a culture where being flawed is still a problem somehow, instead of an expectation. instead of a understanding that is where we're going to find beauty in one another, is in where we are different and unexpected. A lot of our conversations are about unearthing really what, for my clients, what is theirs? What is theirs to hold? And what has been something that's been inherited or swallowed from the culture? And then where can we dig it out at the root when we find it? We know that we're going to feel shame every day as humans. We know from Brene Brown's research that shame is not something that we can eradicate, but we can build resilience to it. And I think the way we do that is first by knowing what's ours to hold, and then second by practicing things that allow us an empathic and self-compassionate relationship with ourselves that is rooted in knowing that we don't have to be anything more than what we are.
One of the things that is ours to hold is the wisdom of our bodies.
You know, what would it even mean to trust our bodies? Where was trust broken with our bodies? What kind of cycle of behavior have we been in that reinforces the distrust of our bodies? So the culture is very clear to say that bodies are a problem. You know, so if bodies get too big, it's something that we have to take responsibility for. And we also, in our, you know, particularly in the United States, we don't really trust people with food. You know, our response into this concern about disease that have been commonly associated with obesity but aren't necessarily so, like diabetes and hypertension, has been to overly nutritionalize the culture. You know, we just do all this nutritional information. We assume that somehow fear is going to change people's behavior. And we also assume that people's behavior, not living in this very troubling culture about bodies and food, is causing the problem. We look a little bit at hunger work that's rooted in, you know, attuned eating or intuitive eating. We talk a little bit about, we really work on self-compassion in our programs and having ways to address the inner critic so we can keep moving forward with a few of them. But we also talk about joyful movement. And we tend to live from a very small, scared part of ourselves. You know, fear seems in the show instead of love, and instead of just staying connected to why we're even here on this short little wild journey we call life. You know? We really lean heavily into Kristen Neff's really wonderful research on self-compassion. She acknowledges that there's 3 parts to it. Like, one is self-kindness, through our very flawed self, accepting our humanity more. The next one is mindfulness, but in the instance of self-compassion, we're talking about really allowing ourselves the experience of what we're feeling. I think so much when we're used to doing something compulsively and used to numbing, we move away from the feeling. Like, I'm watching TV and this really touched me and now I find myself eating something, which is a very simplistic example. But we don't get to just sit and feel and witness very often. We are often thought that we need to do something about it or shove it down. And so in this instance, we're talking about, like, what do you feel? What do you really feel? And what's your truth about that? End of story. But that's enough. And lastly, there's this common humanity piece, which I just love in her research, this idea that we have to know that our struggle is part of how we struggle as humans, that it doesn't make us different, but it makes us alike, is that so many people come in, women particularly, feeling like they're the only one. And it's shocking when we get another group together of women who find that even though they're in all different body types and had all different life experiences, that they can really speak the same language about this, and that we aren't alone. In fact, we're all very much together. So self-kindness, allowing ourselves to feel a little bit, and allowing ourselves to see ourselves as very much a part of what's happening, as a product of what's happened.
BodyWisePerfectSize.com hopes you feel nourished by our talk with Hilary.